We are currently in Easter season in the liturgical year, having celebrated Easter just a few weeks ago. And we've been hearing at Mass joyous readings, even ecstatic readings, about the encounter of the disciples with the risen Jesus. And once Jesus had left, the apostles went out and preached the gospel and did wondrous deeds, and people were drawn to them. It's a story of triumph over sin and suffering. But in today's first reading from the Acts of the Apostles, the joy of Easter turns to talk of trials. It is necessary for us, says St. Paul and Barnabas to the disciples, to undergo many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. After the experience of the utter joy of the resurrection, the disciples soon learned that the cross of Christ was not something that was to be discarded after Jesus rose and ascended. They too would have to carry that cross. They would have to endure hardships on their journey to the kingdom of God. Now, at first blush, you might think the point is simply the obvious one, that in any significant endeavors, there's going to be setbacks and there will be tough stretches. It's like saying, if you want a degree from the University of Notre Dame, let me tell you, there's going to be some cold, dreary, long days in February. Maybe more than a few. That's true enough. But Paul and Barnabas' point is perhaps a more profound one. The trials don't simply accompany the journey to the kingdom. They provide the doors to get there. How can that be? You know, I have this friend who is a priest, and he's one of the most active, generous, and engaged people I know, which is really interesting because he's been blind ever since childhood. I marvel again and again at how his blindness has even facilitated rather than impeded his generous engagement with others. As you might expect, he needs help with a lot of really simple tasks. When I eat dinner with him, I kind of point out where the food is. Sometimes I have to cut his meat for him. He's a very active priest, but he needs a ride, needs somebody to drive him to Mass and back from Mass, or to confessions and back. When traveling, he needs help in navigating airports, finding his gate, boarding the plane, and amazingly, he likes to jog. But he can only do that if he's tethered to someone who runs before him and keeps him on track. But he keeps doing all these things. He needs help for things that we all take for granted. But he has this gift of accepting help without the least bit of embarrassment or self-consciousness. If I had asked you to cut my meat for me, I would be embarrassed. Him, not at all. Not at all. And moreover, I've noticed that when people see him with his cane, they're more than willing to assist, to be of help. In a way, it brings out the best in them, the most generous part in them to help when they see my friend. So, he encounters people who are willing to help, and he's open to accepting help, and he's able to form immediate and deep connections with people. My friend is so good about learning names and learning the stories of people. He will talk about Frank's family, who drives him to Mass, or George, who helps him jog. So he not only gets help jogging or with a ride, he's given friends. He makes friendships. He has this remarkable knack for connecting with people and making friends of people who a moment before were perfect strangers. My friend's blindness has certainly been a hardship for him. It's been a trial. Yet it's become for him a means of making connections, of engaging others, of forming friendships. And that has made him one of the most effective priests and ministers that I know. The hardship of losing his sight contributed to him become so positively and profoundly engaged with the people around him. Class of 2022. Your time at Notre Dame no doubt gave you many wonderful memories, but we all know there were a lot of hardships for you. In March of 2020, as you recall, your time here on campus abruptly ended. We had to send you home during spring break because of the advent of the pandemic. We regathered for the 2020-21 academic year, but we know how hard that was. There were rules about mass and social distancing. I don't know if you remember those. Restrictions on parties, gatherings, visiting dorms. There were surges and lockdowns, and we had to go virtual for a while. There were quarantines and testing for everyone. I have to give a shout out to one student, one graduate, John Sebastian Thorne, Jazz to his friends. Jazz claims the record of having endured eight quarantines in academic year 2020-21. Eight times he had to pack up his belongings, move to a local hotel, and spend a week alone in the room. However, he made the most of it. He wrote for us a review in The Observer of the hotels in South Bend, which were his favorites, which left a little bit of desired, and the cuisine. He had an interesting video on his last day in quarantine, which actually wasn't his last because he had to go one more time. He was a great example of how you can find humor in a tough year. Class of 2022, you've known a lot of hardships in the last few years. You may have found yourself wishing that you had enjoyed a more normal time in college without the difficulties brought on by the pandemic. We should not deny nor neglect the hardships, but neither should you fail to appreciate the gifts they brought. The need to rely on others more. The creativity you showed in dealing with obstacles or inconveniences. The ways in which perhaps the COVID conditions led you to spend more time at home or in the dorm and allowed you to make some surprising new friendships. Class of 2022, look for the gifts that have given to you in these challenging years. For me, I remember those football games in the fall of 2020. Generations of Notre Dame students have attended games, and they've been exciting and fun. But in 2020, that stadium was only for you students. A great marching band provided the music. You danced, and you sang, and you cheered on an team undefeated in the regular season. I've been to a lot of games in that stadium over the years. I've never seen the stadium more joyful. That difficult year helped us all discover the simple joy of being together. Trials have a way of inviting us to come together and find joys we might have missed. I've experienced something similar in the company of our commencement speaker, our guest, Archbishop Boris Gudziak. You see, Archbishop Boris founded a university in Ukraine, in Western Ukraine. It has become, in a short time, an excellent university. But Boris had the insight to put in his university a community of people with intellectual disabilities in the model of the large communities around the world. People with intellectual disabilities face challenges, but they invite us in an uninhibited way to respond with love and care. They remind us that the most genuine and joyful interactions are often not about clever conversations or astute insights, but about simply encountering another person in love. I can say that when I visited that special community with Archbishop Boris at Ukraine University, Catholic University, it was among the most joyful places I have ever been. In the gospel reading just read, Jesus gives to his disciples the great command: love one another as I have loved you. The command is simple, but anyone who has tried to live it knows how demanding it is. We try again and again, we fail. But in a surprising way, it is often the hardships we encounter that invite us to give love more generously and receive it more humbly. I hope that with all the challenges you, class of 2022, have faced in recent years, you have found and responded to that invitation. As you leave Notre Dame, as you go on with your life, I pray that whatever challenges you encounter, you find in them a door to love and to the kingdom of God.